from Birmingham University, who ended up spending 10 nights in jail for unfurling a protest banner at the Liberal Democrat conference last year. The sign above Broad Street read, "Traitors not welcome," and Edd Bauer ended up being arrested. The 23-year-old has now been cleared, been convicted of no offence, but says his time in prison was hell. And Ed joins me now. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you.
So just take us back then. What were you doing on Broad Street, waving a banner that said "Traitors not welcome"?
Well, I think most people will understand exactly what we're up to. Like, most people do feel betrayed by the Liberal Democrats. Their election pledges have been directly contradicted by their activities in government, propping up one of the most right-wing governments this country's ever seen, but forcing through an agenda of privatisation and cuts that are really hurting.
So you turned out with your banner to make your views known. Traitors not welcome here.
Absolutely.
What happened?
Well, what happened is not just an isolated event. It's part of a systematic a targeting of political protesters. My arrest on that day and the recent 10 days that I spent in prison in HMP Birmingham, which is a Class A Victorian prison, is part of a targeting by me, by the police, but has been going on for a significant time before that. It started for me on March 26th with the time I was arrested actually at Fortnum&Mason, which was a UK uncut action against tax dodging.
Well, you were part of that particular protest. That was the protest where the police told the people inside, if you all leave now, we're not going to take any action against you, but then subsequently started rounding up those who had been part of the protest.
Yeah, absolutely. It said we're peaceful and well-behaved, but since that date, it became obviously apparent to me that I'd been put on some kind of police database. For example, on the day of the royal wedding, my house was raided for the first time. West Midlands police came to my house at 8 AM in the morning, got me out of bed and told me to make sure I stay out of London for the royal wedding. Obviously, I had no intention of going to London. I thought it was quite funny at the time.
Where's your flat? Where's your house?
I lived in Selly Oak at the time, in student accommodation. Yeah. But over the summer, I was surprised to see these visits by the police, and in fact, raids continue. In fact, they raided my house 3 times over the summer, and one time they even kicked down the door with a sledgehammer. The final one of these raids was actually the weekend before the Liberal Democrat conference. The police have database of activists who they believe to be troublemakers. Also, these databases do contain peaceful protesters like myself, and I think that's why, when I unfurled this banner and they found out who my name was, and I got clocked on this database, but in fact they didn't arrest me. I heard come over the police radio, buzz, Edd Bauer, Fortnum&Mason, at which point I was held in Aston Police Station for 72 hours and then taken to Magistrates Court after that period. And at Magistrate Court, I was shocked to find the Crown Prosecution Services appealing for me to be held in prison until my trial. Amazingly, on the grounds, but I was a member of a student campaigning organisation called the National Campaign Against Fees and Cuts, and therefore if I was let go, I was liable to organise more protests. I see that as an open appeal for political discrimination and political targeting of activists backed up by the courts.
What were you charged with?
I was charged with danger to road use. It's Section 23A of the 1988 Road Traffic Act. The judge in court, when it was eventually laughed out of court, said he'd never seen anything like it. But I think the important thing, when I describe the thing as hell, I don't describe just prison. Like, as soon as I came out of prison, I was suspended from my job. When I went back to my university campus, I was eventually, as a direct consequence of being sent to prison, actually banned from going onto my campus for several months. And that was only eventually repealed shortly before Christmas.
Can I just stress something, Ed, because you use the phrase kind of peaceful protesters. Do you disavow the use of any kind of violence to achieve political ends? And have you got any convictions for violence?
I have no convictions for any violence myself. But I think the important thing to remember is, like, there are a lot of kids who may have done, like, minor acts of violence. Like, say at Millbank, they may have smashed a window, but, like, what are these kids going through? What has led them to do that? Like, what are the kids who's, like, just losing their educational maintenance allowance, whose parents are losing their benefits, who are then being looked to have to pay £9,000 to go to university, who are really at the sharp end of the stick? What is them smashing a window? Why are they getting targeted so viciously by the police and the courts? I don't want to disavow them, because I fully understand the events in their lives that have led them to do what are incredibly minor acts of violence. Like, let's look at...
But I'm just trying to, in terms of your alleged targeting by the police, I just want to make it clear, though, that, so listeners understand that you have not been involved in any act of political violence that has led to a conviction. You are somebody who took part in a protest at Fortnum and Mason. You're one of the people who occupied it. The police at the time told you that you would be freed, as they told the other protesters, and you were, but then subsequently, contrary to the police promise, they came looking for you. And you've never orchestrated or organised any acts of violence yourself.
No.
What was it actually like inside HM Prison in Birmingham in Winson Green?
Well, I don't really need to get into this massively, but obviously it's not nice. I was mugged on my first day. I'm not the biggest guy in the world. HMP Birmingham is not a remand prison, class a remand prisoner. It's for class A to C. I was in a ward full of people who'd committed rape, murder, like it's fully mixed in. Like, the prison was actually built in Victorian times, is drastically overcrowded and underfunded. And
in terms of how you were put up in a cell and so on, what were those kind of arrangements for you?
I was eventually shifted cells 3 times, and only on my 3rd time did I find someone who I felt safe with in my cell. But I think, although it sounds bad, myself spending 10 days in prison, we should think about people like Frank Fernie, who ultimately is, I believe, a good person, who spent several months in prison for simply throwing a stick of balsa wood out of a thrush of anger at a fully armoured riot police, clearly with no intention to cause any injury. And think about now Alfie Meadows, who was assaulted and nearly died in Parliament Square last December after the police attacked him, and is now being put through the courts. He's going to be appearing in court on March 26th for violent disorder. He faces...
Well, let's not talk about that. Let's talk about you, because they can talk for themselves if they come on the programme. I want to know about your time in prison, because I actually think this is at the heart of what appears to me, on the face of it, to be a scandal, that you've been charged with a relatively minor offence, a road traffic offence, essentially, whether or not people think it was right to charge you, but then banged up in one of the hardest prisons in the country. I think, actually, that is worth dwelling on, Ed.
Yeah, well, the British prison system isn't nice. Prisoners spend 23.5 hours a day in their cells. There's not the free time to walk around, to have social. It's only 1 hour a week, but you get to spend in the yard. If you want to visit the library, it takes 2 weeks to get security clearance to even do that. Same if you want to do any educational programmes while you're in there, it takes 2 weeks to do it. So most prisoners find themselves impossible to engage in any kind of reading or any kind of physical activity, and most of them feel isolated and quite depressed, and that's quite obvious.
And who were your cellmates?
My first night I was put in with a man who'd committed murder, who was being transferred between prisons. I was then given a mentor who was a guy who'd also committed murder, however, maybe manslaughter as he put it. And finally, I was put in with a very nice guy who'd only committed fraud, who was nicknamed Pops and looked after me very well.
Mm-hmm. But you feel, presumably, that you had no place in a prison like that, even had you been found guilty in the event, as you say, the charges were you were not guilty. Did you actually come to a not guilty verdict, or was it thrown out?
Yeah, laughed out of court.
Not guilty. Seconds. So, but you shouldn't have been there in the first place.
No, but what made the entire thing a lot easier for me was the letters I received every day from activists. Looking out for me and telling me I didn't deserve to be in there, but they supported my actions. And there are prisoners like me, peaceful protesters, and also other protesters who find themselves in prison, who would much appreciate a letter. And you can find them online by searching for a Green and Black Cross, and they organise letter writing programmes to these student prisons, because there are political prisons in the UK.
Has it put you off protesting?
Absolutely not. I don't think anyone else should be put off protesting, because what do we have to lose apart from our education system, our public services and the welfare state?
In terms of how the police deal with incidents like this, I mean, they do, don't they, have to deal with people who set out to create disorder on the streets. You'll remember that the student protests in London, for example, were very violent, and that there were people saying that Parliament might even have been breached. I mean, the police can't afford just to stand back and wait for bad things to happen, can they?
Are you kidding? The police set out to control public disorder? I was in Parliament Square, actually. We've got to think about police tactics and what they did in Parliament Square. How were they controlling disorder? So they've got two tactics to deal with protests. One is containment, which is a kettle, and the other is dispersal tactics, so charging the protests with batons, using the police horses. But what happened in Parliament Square was they kettled the protest, and then when a protest was kettled, they used dispersal tactics. So we see into that kettle police horses charging into it, police doing repeated baton charges. Where did they think that protesters or the people inside were going to go? How is that a tactic, using dispersal and containment tactics at the same time to control disorder? It only creates disorder. The way I see the police now is in fact the biggest gang on the streets. They scare me, and they're the ones who go out to protest dressed for a riot.
Have you had any dealings with West Midlands Police, sought to get some kind of explanation or redress for the way you've been treated?
So some redress from the police? Well, I'm obviously looking into my lawyers and the legal situation around it, but the thing is, so often cases like mine, nothing ever or any redress ever comes, because to get the police, the Independent Police Complaints Commission is an absolute joke. The man who killed Ian Tomlinson has still not received.
Let's not. You're talking about cases that are still active and where where legally we might be on dodgy ground. So let's not go there. I brought you in to talk about your situation, Ed, and whether you were confident of getting any.
My point was going to be, but
don't talk about active cases, though.
Doesn't lead to any punishment, seemingly ever, whereas the persecution and punishment of protesters seems efficient and quick. It doesn't seem that there's much chance of redress for any protesters who's the victim of the sharp end of political policing.
Would you accept that, for example, at any of the student protests, that any of the student rioters did anything wrong?
Anything wrong?
Yeah.
Oh, it's such a blanket statement.
Well, yeah, but it's a simple one. You can either say yes or no to it, can't you? I mean, people were pushing through, smashing up shop windows, they were attacking police officers. You would accept, wouldn't you, that the rioters misbehaved?
Well, let's look at this in some sense of...
That wasn't a yes or no, was it?
Well, it's not a simple yes or no answer. How can you say yes or no? As I said earlier, I fully understand what has driven a kid who's suffering, having their parents taken off welfare, their educational maintenance allowance, which is a single thing but it's allowed them to continue studying their A-levels, and then being told they're not going to be able to go to university because they won't be able to afford it. We're now seeing surveys done that show that 1 in 2 people will consider not going to university.
Yeah, but
I fully understand the anger that would lead them to simply smash a window. That act of violence is tiny compared to the act of violence which is the cuts, the acts of destruction of the welfare state.
People can go to university, can't they? They have to pay a fee after they have qualified to go to university. They have to pay a fee.
Tuition fees are not the main block to going to university.
Sorry, we're having a conversation. They have to pay a fee. Okay, they have to pay a fee after they've graduated based on their income. That's not stopping anybody going to university, is it? They might not like the choice that they have to make, but it is not stopping a single person going to university.
See, I think that comes from a fundamental misunderstanding and, of course, the mis-selling of what the coalition have done to the education system. 1 in 9 people will say they won't go to university because of the tuition fee regime. That's a statistic survey done by the BBC, in fact. And that's because those people suffer from debt adversity. They're more afraid to take on debt, and they're more likely to have that debt adversity to come from a poor background. 1 in 2 people will say, though, they won't go to university because they cannot afford the cost of living. The living grants, the maintenance allowance have also been totally destroyed. That is the real sharp end of the financial stick.
But plenty of students, therefore, go and get a job in order to pay their way for university.
Well, a lot of students I know students in my university are doing 2 or 3 jobs, and their studies really do significantly suffer because the work they have to do compared to their peers who can actually afford to do education properly. And if you think, I'm not going to have to work, full-time, basically, to fund myself through this, maybe, I shouldn't even go to university. And we are seeing a dramatic decline in the number of people applying to university, especially from those people from poorer backgrounds.
We'll speak to you again. I'd love to have you in, and when we talk about education specifically, if you'd happily come in and do that. And I appreciate you coming in and sharing your story with us today. Really good to have you. And just stay there a minute, because it makes a racket if you go out while we're on air. Joanne Manning, but fascinating stuff, and thank you genuinely for sharing your story. I'm sure we could cross swords in an interesting way on a debate about education, but thank you for that. Joanne Manning is here from 12 o'clock. What you got, Joanne?
I am. Good afternoon, almost, everybody. Yes, after an 18-month battle, I'm going to have some good news for MS sufferers across the West Midlands this afternoon. We are camping and caravanning on Wish You Were There this week. If you like that kind of thing, where is the best site in the country? I'm going to be talking to the leader of the charitable organisation the Masons, once seen as a very secretive society. What's different about it today? If you're a member, I'd love to hear your stories, please.